And good morning. This is this is Frank Klink. Hello, YouTube people. Very happy that you're with us today, and I'm really glad that you're able to spend some time and sit down and watch a video here with us. So I've got a couple of YouTube channels. Frank's Hangar is one. Frank Klink is the other. My name, and a new venture. Usually, you see a video and I'm in the backyard and we're making a big racket, and we've got neighbors running over to see what the latest engine is that we've got in the test stand. And but today it's a departure, something brand new, a brand new venture, and we're going to do an interview today. So it's a little bit cool outside. Of course I'm in Canada. Um, it's a cold winter's day outside, so I'm watching snow fall from the sky right now. I don't want to go outside and run a motor. Too cool. So engines, model airplane engines. To the collectors out there, the Oliver Tiger engine, uh, a famous model airplane engine, has been around for quite a few years now. Um, Anybody that has a collection, I'm sure has an Oliver Tiger in it. If not, you've heard of it, and you're in the process of trying to find one, trying to buy one. They're an amazing engine. They have a tone, they have a note all their own. I found I've run a lot of diesel engines over the past summer here, and the Olivers, you can tell right away when you've got one in the start box. So um, today I have a gentleman with me here, and his name is Steve Fardon. He's from the United Kingdom. Coventry, is that correct, Steve?
Yes, it is, Frank. Yeah,
Yeah,
Coventry. Yeah, right,
Coventry
right in the
area.
centre.
Yeah. And he has a remarkable connection to the Oliver Tiger. You've heard of a website called J. Oliver Engines. Well, this is the man sitting right beside me here. He is the direct connection to it. So we're gonna talk with Steve today about the Oliver Tiger and see where he fits into this connection with the Oliver. So Steve, thanks so much for being with us today, and take it away.
Okay, well, thanks, Frank. It's an absolute pleasure. Right, so if we just do a brief history of where the Olivers originally came from. So during the Second World War, um, in an area we call the East Midlands of England, called Nottingham, there was a father and son team. So it's a J. A. Oliver senior and J. S. Oliver son, and they had a small engineering company. And JSO, the son, was actually posted in Iraq in the war. And while he was away, his dad, he made a model compression ignition engine, and at that time they were really keen on tethered cars. That was their passion, and he actually sent his first engine out to Iraq to his son to show him what he'd made, and there appeared to be quite a bit of interest in it. So when JSO when the war finished and JSO was demobbed back to the UK, they started producing these little engines, and the first commercial one was called a Battle Axe, and they were for tethered cars. I think Control Line was around at the time, and they developed these engines into the Tiger series of engines. And a very successful one for tethered cars was the Mark II Oliver Tiger 2.5 cc, and it was really quite powerful for its time, and was quite noted. And of course, some people said, well, if you can make this thing a bit lighter, it would be useful in model aircraft. So they did that, what they made was what ended up as being this was the Mark III. You see that, Frank? Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear. Yeah.
That's a Mark III Oliver, and
Can
I
I
think that.
can I hold that for a moment? Like,
Yeah, sure, yeah.
oh, all right. I'm just trying to grab it there. Yeah.
Okay.
Mark,
That's a Mark III Oliver, yeah.
right.
I mean, this is quite a later one that I've been messing around with a peripheral Venturi on it,
Hmm.
rather than the spray bar going through the middle. It just obviously, if you haven't got a spray bar going through the middle of the Venturi, you haven't got an impingement on the air going through, so you just get a little bit more airflow with the peripheral type on it.
Right.
So I think that the Mark III, I think it was 1954 when the Mark III came out, and a few years later, I think it actually won the World Championships, something like 56 or 59, something like that, in team racing. And then so really the actual engineering business as it was, that the demand came so great for their engines that they really abandoned all the other sort of like subcontract work that they did and just concentrated on making engines. And the interesting thing for me was about them when I actually got to meet JSO was that all of my life, from when I was a teenager, we knew that Oliver Tigers were a legendary engine, and the likes of us couldn't afford one. But you imagine a legendary engine to be part of some big sophisticated company.
Oh, yeah, you would think so.
Yeah, and I'll elaborate a bit later. But when I did get to go and to the workshop and meet John Oliver, it was just a garage on the side of their house, and with some pretty old machinery in it, and so I'll come back to that later, that meeting, because that was quite something. So all through the 50s, 60s, 70s, they really had a job keeping up with the demand because they're pretty much handmade, and there was always a strict regime of ordering. They were never available in the shops. You wrote to the Olivers and ordered an engine, and you went on a list, and it didn't matter if you were the world champion who needed an engine for the world championships coming up. There was never any favoritism. You were just on the list because these guys were two sort of gentlemen who couldn't be seen to be favouring anybody. Everybody was treated equally, and that was always the thing. And when an engine was complete and they tested everyone, you were informed that your engine is ready if you'd like to pay, and then the engine was stamped, and your name got into a book associated with that particular engine. I think in the 70s, one of the problems that they found when using the Oliver Mark III in combat was that, if I could probably show you on here,
All right.
this area of the crankcase here, if you were to look in cross section, the front bearing leaves quite a thin wall thickness here. Mm-hmm. And the nature of combat, where there's lots of crashes, Olivers did suffer a bit from the front of that breaking off. So that's when they developed what was the Mark IV. Now the Mark IV, although this isn't a Mark IV, this is a very late JSO 19, but it's based around a Mark IV case, where they changed the shape of the case there to be stronger, to take more impact, and that was the purpose of the Mark IV. A few other changes, like they thickened the liner and stuff like that, but essentially the internals are the same. In fact, I think that the Mark IVs were so crazy that in the demand for them, at one stage there was a year waiting list for Mark IVs.
Wow.
Yeah, and then they had the other variants, as people probably know. This is the 1.5cc. This is the Oliver Tiger Cub Mark II. Mm-hmm. So that's 1.5cc. They made those. A bit later on, they had the Schnurl Cub variant, with the Schnell port in them, but bottom end's the same, but just with a different line, you know, with the Schnell type porting in it.
Right.
And then obviously what have I got here? The major. That's a major. That's the 3.5 cc.
Mm-hmm.
They did a radio controlled version of this as well with a carburetor on it.
Right.
There weren't that many majors sold. I mean, this is engine number 914. So they only made 914 majors, whereas I think they made about 11,000 Mark IIIs and
Wow.
Mark IVs even more.
Mm-hmm.
A bit later, towards the end, because not sure when John Oliver Senior died, but in the 1980s they retired really. But one engine they were working from, which I don't have at the moment, although I want to make one. I've got enough bits to make them. Is the Mark V, which
Right.
was lovely looking engine, which was a 2.5 cc,
Mm-hmm.
but Schnell ported.
Okay. Yeah.
And the Olivers actually made 50 of those,
Mm-hmm.
and quite a few clones. And we made quite a few when I was with Tom Ridley. Actually, they're really nice looking engine. So, as I say, I think in the 80s is when they retired.
Right.
And you can understand from the 80s right up until probably 2008, which was when we started making them again, which I'll come back to. There was a huge vacuum
Yeah.
of Oliver engines, and because they were, because of their legendary status, they were really collectible. And
they still are.
yeah.
Yeah.
So people, flyers, modelers, a lot of them were for glass cases, obviously for collectors, and saw them change hands for quite a bit.
Right.
Now, I don't really know the full dates of when this took place, but in the UK, in the control line scene, with the advent of games and the internet and other things to take young people's interests away,
Right.
and obviously radio control being so much more affordable, control line flying, as it probably did worldwide, really.
I've lost you on sound, Steve. Steve, I can't hear you.
You got me back?
There we are.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I lost the last 10 seconds of your sound there. Sorry.
Okay. So with the decline just over the years of the popularity of people taking up the sport of control line flying, and in the F2C class of team racing, it was essentially the same few people that would win every year. There were people who were just specialist engine makers, or and there was some attempt, which was quite successful, to give other people a chance and not have their interest waning in it, to bring in a vintage class. And I believe that one of the stipulations was that to be in the vintage class, your engine must have been designed before 1960.
Right.
And of course, during the heyday of the 60s, the Oliver was the engine. You needed an Oliver to compete. So through being in a modelling club and being a modeller myself, I was friends for a long time with a chap called Tom Ridley, and Tom Ridley owned an engineering company called Clint Hill Engineering in Leicestershire in England, and so we were friends for a long time, and that was a radio control club that we were part of. But Tom and I did occasionally go and take a control line plane to the field and fly it, much to the amazement of other people that didn't realise.
The takeoff and the landing. Oh.
Yeah. The thing was that I remember at that time I hadn't flown for a control line plane for maybe 25 years, and that was a friend of mine. We used to at school. I was at school as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
We got into modelling, and we made peacemakers, and that was where I first knew of an Oliver Tiger engine, because his peacemaker had an engine in it that his brother gave him that was an Oliver Tiger.
Right.
And my peacemaker had a thing called an ED racer in it.
Ah.
And his Oliver Tiger used to run rings around my ED racer. And sometimes we would combat each other, but we didn't know anybody. So the only time that we could combat each other was if we could persuade a passerby to launch a plane for us.
Oh, right.
So we could
Right.
be in the air at the same time.
You had to
So
hire a stooge. Yeah.
Yeah. We weren't very pleased because we didn't tell them that they'd get a face full of castor oil when they did it. But
Good for the skin.
yeah. So so I was friends with Tom, good friends with Tom,
Right.
and I eventually ended up being the engineering manager at Tom's Clint Hill Engineering Works, which was probably about 2006.
Right.
Now, we were basically a subcontract engineering factory, and we had mainly CNC sliding head lathes, really quite sophisticated, really up to date lathes,
Mm-hmm.
and machining centres. And Tom decided that he wanted to. Tom was coming up to retirement. He's a bit older than me, and he decided that he wanted to start making. He got back into his control line, and his he used to compete in team racing at that time,
Right.
back in the day.
Right.
And because of obviously the legendary status of the Olivers, although they hadn't been made since the 80s, that you could buy a Chinese copy, the
Right.
CS Tiger,
Yeah.
and I think there was a Ukrainian one as well. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a really good bespoke version made by Steve Rothwell in Australia that were really something special. They were. I think he stopped doing them now. But Tom said, I want to make Olivers, but I don't want to make copies or clones, and I'll be damned if I'm buying one from China.
Okay.
So and we've got some fantastic equipment here. So
Yeah.
he said, I'm going to try and find John Oliver. So I'm not sure how he did it, but he found somebody who knew him and got an
Right.
introduction. And they lived on the south coast at that time. Well, John did.
So this was John So this was,
John
sorry
Oliver,
to interrupt. This was Senior that he was dealing with
No.
now.
Senior had died. Senior was.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Junior was 80 something.
Right.
Back in 2000. This was in 2008.
Oh, okay.
And but he did get an introduction to him, and it turned out that the workshop was just like a museum, because there was a door into his house from it.
Mm-hmm.
So he still tinkered a little bit,
Right.
but essentially it was like a living museum. It was just as they stopped work.
Really?
And yeah, so he was a very, very sort of mild-natured man, was JSO, and he was quite flattered that people were still interested in his engines. And eventually Tom persuaded him to sell him the name and everything that goes with it, so that we could legitimately be J. Oliver Engines.
You would be the manufacturer. Yeah.
Yeah. And not only that he acted as a consultant for us, and so we would go and visit him and get his approval and opinion on the things that we'd made.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I got the chance to go down to it's a place called Ferndown in Dorset on the south coast of the UK. They'd moved from Nottingham long since then.
Mm-hmm.
And so we met JSO, which is John Oliver Jr., in his workshop, and that's where I first realised it's just a shed on the side of a house where all of these
right. Yeah. It's not some big sprawling facility.
No, and they never employed anybody. It was just father and son.
Is that right?
No, yeah, and all of this equipment was a lot of it was pre-war, old capstan lathes and little milling machines, all belt driven and all that kind of stuff.
Wasn't steam, was it?
It wasn't far off, I'm telling you. Yeah. And of course, you realise then that the skill, because these guys weren't actually trained as engineers, you know, so everything they
No.
made just came out of what they created themselves to do a job.
Right.
And how they come up with such a fantastically consistent product was a testament to the skill that they had, really.
Yeah.
And so we looked around all of the workshop, and we also found out that they didn't have any drawings for any of these things. It was all done in their head.
No way.
And yeah, so we had a factory with some employees, and we had CNC machinery, and we needed to make drawings for the engines, you know. And we actually made our method of manufacture was different to theirs as well. That lent itself to use on CNC machines. And so my first job was to get a variant, all of the variants of the Olivers, and dismantle them and measure them and make CAD drawings from them, which was then a bit alarming because I never found two the same.
Which one do you go with?
That's right. Yeah, I mean they're nearly
Yeah.
the same, but you couldn't just guarantee you could put all the internals in one and it would be
fit
right.
in it. Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody that's listening that owns an Oliver knows that there's kind of there's a little bit of individuality to them.
Right.
And so in 2008, that's what we did. I have an interesting story on the individuality, and I'm just going to reach down and get a little tool here if I've got it to hand. So when I made the first drawing of a cylinder jacket, excuse me, if you excuse me for a second, can I just go and get the drawing?
Why, of course.
Yeah.
This is where I start singing to entertain, but I won't. Okay. Actually,
Okay.
Steve's a singer. Yeah. I'm just entertaining the crowds. Yeah.
Okay. So this back then, it says 2008 on it, was my CAD drawing of an Oliver cylinder jacket.
Right.
Mark III. And then Tom said to me, "That's wrong, Steve. You've done it wrong." Why is that, Tom? He said, "Because you've spaced all of the fins equally on the engine. And on the Olivers, they're all different thicknesses." So I said, "Yes, but Tom, I've got 3 Mark IIIs here, and they are all different spacings and thicknesses, but they're all different. And I suspect it's just an inaccuracy way that they made these things. I don't think that was done by design."
Right.
Because Tom said, because they don't look authentic, because your fins are all straight. So on that first visit that I went to, and Tom, we were fantastic friends.
Right.
But we suffered from the same trait in each other, is that he was always right and so was I. So, we were great friends. We did argue a bit.
Right.
And of course, also while this is going on, I'm running the factory and all of the work that's going through at the same time.
Sure.
So on that first visit to John Oliver's workshop, there was an old Colchester student lathe, a really old one, and in the tool post, I saw this actual tool here, and I instantly knew what it was. It's still got Oliver's swarf on it, by the way. What this is here.
Yeah.
And I said to John Oliver, I said, "Is that the tool that you put the fins in on the Olivers?" Right. And he said, yes. He said, "It's made of a series of old power hacksaw blades joined together with spacers." And he said, "You might see that on some of my fins are not always equally spaced, and that was because if a tool broke, I just got another power hacksaw blade and ground one by hand and put it in." So I was just looking at Tom going, "I told you."
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. Well, that's the actual tool that if any of your viewers watching on this have got Olivers, your fins were all put in with that tool.
With that particular device right there.
Tool, yeah. I've got some more bits down here that are a bit original Oliver tools. So this is an Oliver tool that was the crankcase fitted in like that basically, and it would go in a lathe, and that's how they would turn the bit that the end of the cylinder goes in. So it's got these little adjusting feet to go under the lugs, and the engine bolted in there. That you know, that's right back from the 50s. What else have we got? Okay, this is a simple drill jig, a John Oliver drill jig. You might be able to see there's a little pin just there.
Yes.
And there. So that ends the major crankshaft, and that ends the Mark III and the Mark IV. And then the cross hole for the intake in the crankshaft, you put your crankshaft in there, the crank pin located on that little pin.
Right.
And then they would drill through to put the cross hole in. Right.
Right.
And that you know, that's all of those engines have all been made on these little tools. It's just fascinating to me that this is the tool that it's all makeshift, just out of bits of metal that they found around. But this would go on a little milling machine they had, and your cylinders would go on there, and the transfer ports were originally drilled, but then they squared them off, so they had a little broaching tool that they would go up and down, index the thing around, and square off all of your ports inside of that. So these things are from the 50s. These things are absolutely amazing. Another little tool here. This is for your exhaust ports. That would go in the vise on a milling machine, and they had a little woodruff cutter. Your cylinder goes in there, and the woodruff cutter would put an exhaust port in. They'd pull the pin, turn it through 90 degrees, drop the pin back in, and do another one.
Oh, okay.
So
Gotcha.
All of these little gadgets. Small boring tools for finishing off the bearing sizes in the front. Just these handmade little tools that they made.
Yeah.
So you'd pick up on the 3/8 shaft bearing there that would centralise it, and then the little cutter would do the bore, and that little cutter there would do the face.
Right.
That's what all of those Olivers were made at. Even the tap that your back plate goes on.
Right.
They even made that tap.
Okay.
So that's the tap there, and it's expandable for when it wears, that you can adjust it. They even made everything. Everything was made. So in 2008 was when we started making those drawings. I had several visits to see John Oliver. Tom was down there quite regularly, particularly when we started, you know, learning how to get the piston and liner fit and that kind of thing, which was you know, really a black art, to be honest with you, and I think it still is. And so we started making Mark IIIs, and then we started making Mark IVs, and then Cubs, and we made every variant. These are all obviously these are all Tom Ridley era engines. None of these are actual John Oliver engines.
Sure.
Again, towards the end, because Tom unfortunately died in 2016. Which was a real shame, because he'd started his business. I mean, it's a shame when people die, but Tom and his wife Julia had started Clint Hill Engineering in a garage with a capstan lathe in 1968, and had just worked hard all of his life. You know, had 30 employees at one stage and a night shift. He lived for engineering, and he lived for modelling, and he sold Clint Hill Engineering. Must have been about 2014-ish, and the company that bought Clint Hill Engineering moved it, and I went there, so I was no longer employed by Tom, but because it was me that had essentially made all of the bits for the engines, and made all the tooling for it, and understood how all the bits were made. And I was always still friends with Tom. That he retained a few of the machine tools, like the machining centre and the little Myford grinder. And so of a weekend, he would ring me up maybe and say, Steve, can you come and program the machining centre for me? I need some crankcases making. So even though I didn't work for him directly, I just would, of a weekend, every now and again, go and make some bits for him. And his plan was, in his retirement, was to carry on making the engines. That's, you know, that's all he lived for, really. And so at his home, he built a beautiful workshop, a really beautiful workshop there with the 3-phase power, and put the machining centre in and a few of the bits and bobs. And then he caught cancer. He got cancer, bless him, and of the lung cancer. And the last year of his life, he was really quite ill. And it was really a shame that having worked so hard all of his life and built that up, and he deserved a retirement. And it was, you know, it was really upsetting when he died. I was actually working on making Cub crankcases for him right up to within days of him dying, really. So it was really, really sad and not fair in a way that Tom had done all of that. And so I remained friends with his wife, Julie. I'd always been friends with them. And at one stage, Matthew, Tom's son, was thinking of carrying on the Oliver name and making the engines. But he got busy with something else. But I always said that I would help him with it. And Julie originally asked me to go over to the workshop, because she said, you're probably the only person alive now that can look at any of these bits and know what they are.
Right.
And so we need them, you know, cataloguing and separating. And so we did that all into the 5 variants. And the JSO, I don't know if I mentioned the JO19. This is a JO19. This was kind of among the last of the engines that Tom developed. He did this with, it's called the JO19 because him and Tom and John Oliver, they developed this together. And this is based on a Mark IV crankshaft, but it's a 19, so it's like 3.2 cc, specifically for vintage combat. It's an over square, so it's you know, the bore is bigger than the stroke on it. The shaft is instead of 3/8 is 12 mil, so we've got a huge intake port on it, and all of the top end's different, and really fantastically fast engine. And that was one of the last things he was working on. I think he was also working on what they call the 420 and Goodyear engine as well, Goodyear racing.
Right.
So there was all those bits there. So we sorted them all out, and Julius wanted to sell the business and all of the engine parts to somebody who was willing to keep it going, not just sort of sell it off for what they could get for the bits for, you know. So on a few occasions, I went over to their house, to the workshop, when prospective buyers were coming over. And Julie just didn't like any of them really, and so 4 years on, I just said, well, it's got to be me then. I said, Julie,
you're it.
So now I am. Yeah, so I purchased the name and all of the tooling and all of the stuff from Julia, and although I'll never be more as prolific as Tom, because Tom had the backing of a factory, you know, and whatever. This is a more of a passion and a hobby to me, really. It's obviously got to pay for itself, and wouldn't, you know, coming up to retirement, I suppose it's a nice thing to have a little bit of income from it. I don't think that there's a market big enough to make an actual living out of making these engines, but we're going to try and keep them going, you know. So I'm in the process of, as you've discovered my website, there's some of the spares that are available on it, and those the money that I get from the spares is going into making what I need to finish off to make batches of engines, really. So
Right.
all of the money from spares is sort of reinvested into. So we've got like 5 or 6 variants of engines, and on the racks there's 80% of all of them. So we've got a great head start. But for instance, although I've got obviously 1 or 2 bits lying around, so I can make the odd Mark III and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There are no Mark III crankshafts, so I'm having to start from scratch with those. So I'm at this process of having 100 crankshafts made. I mean, I can do all the grinding myself on them, but the turning on them on a batch of 100 is no fun on a Myford in your garage. So
No,
I'm gonna so having those made, and then there's various other bits like gudgeon pins. I need gudgeon pins making. So there's always a bit that I need to have made. I'll make what I can.
right.
On all variants of engines, but the spares is to get the name going again, and to
Sure.
allow people with their Olivers to get bits for them again.
Mm-hmm.
And as I once my Mark III and Mark IV cranks come on stream, I can offer those as spares, and then in a low key way supply engines in the way that they did before to order. You order from me, and I'll inform you when your engine's ready. And
Right. Yeah.
the interesting thing is I've still got all of that came with the business was the original Oliver engine stamps that
Oh, okay. Yeah.
so they're so old that the font on them is quite unique. So when you get people on eBay and whatever sort of trying to fob off an original
Oh,
Oliver,
right. Yeah.
you can tell by the font of the engine number, you see.
Ah.
And so again, which is interesting, because of all of those Olivers that are out there in the world, in the States, Canada, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I got this little box with these stamps in, and I know they've all been held by those people and stamped with those very stamps. It's
Yeah.
and even with the stuff that I'm getting from through that I got from Tom Ridley's venture of it, is that we invested a lot of time together
Mm-hmm.
in the engines, and we were big modelling friends. And I keep finding boxes with parts in with a little note that Tom's written on there, and
Oh,
it's a bit emotional sometimes.
yeah.
It's
Of
like
course it would be.
this JSO 19.
Right.
This was on his workbench that he was building, at the
Yeah.
time when he couldn't work anymore.
Yeah. Right.
And all it needed was a cylinder head and a backplate and a carb on it, and
Mm-hmm.
so I did that and started it up. But this is essentially, as far as I know, this is the very last engine that Tom ever made, really.
That he was working on. Yeah.
Working on. So
Yeah.
there is quite a lot of memories involved in it when I'm up.
I'm sure that obviously there are. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So I've been to your website. I might try and flash it up on the screen here. There we are.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So there's your website, J. Oliver Engines. Of course, we have is that a Mark III right there in the front?
It is a Mark III, yeah.
There you are. So, so how busy are you, Steve? So like, is this, if I go onto your website here, you've got, you have a checkout, and you have a blog that you're obviously got going, and then you've got various pieces in that. So you must be getting orders on a regular basis, are you not?
Absolutely, yeah. Every day there's an order. Now I haven't really advertised too much because I didn't. You understand there's a lot to these engines, and there's only me, and I didn't just want to get swamped.
Yeah, right.
Too much, and end up sort of damaging the brand name, if you like, through giving bad service. So
sure.
Although we have what we call a Barton Model Flying Club forum in the UK that I announced it with the support of some others on there.
The Barton site I've heard of, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and yeah, so it's quite, I'm able to just about keep up with it really,
Good,
and quite a
good.
lot of things, as I've written on my website, that you won't see pictures of them on there, but I've got lots of stuff. If there's anything not on there, just give me a call, and I'm sure I might be able to find something. And I'm
Right.
finding more and more now that that everyone that was going to buy everything from the website is okay for a bit, but they're after things that, you know, I've probably got 5 or 6 complete Mark IV crankshafts, but I wouldn't put them on the website until I've got a batch filled. But if people have been contacting me saying, "Can you find me this?" and I'll go and have a route round, and
Start digging through your boxes and
and so I've sent packages to New Zealand, the Netherlands, and Italy so far as well.
hmm hmm
Interesting. And in fact, the first person, I can't remember his name now, that actually, I've had many inquiries for engines.
Right.
Quite a lot of inquiries for engines, which is exciting.
hmm
But the first one, because it's the first on the list, is going to Tasmania.
Right. Oh,
Yeah. So yeah, a chap, I can't remember his name because there's obviously a lot of names that I'm dealing with now. But I remember that being the first person to ask me for an engine, and
so
yeah,
you're selling the Mark III? What what
yeah.
other engines are you selling,
Well, the
Steve?
Mark III will be the first. What I've decided to
hmm
do is, because of late I've been bogged down with trying to do bits of all engines, and it's just too much.
hmm
So I'm going to concentrate on Mark III's first. So I'm going to build a batch of Mark III's, and then I'm going to build a batch of Mark IV's, and then cut.
How big is a batch?
I would say a batch of them would be like 50.
Okay.
Yeah, probably 50 of them. Um, and all of these engines here that obviously that I've been showing you now, these are ones that I've made and assembled from the parts that I already have, but I'm
Right.
using them, just as test purposes. That, like on this core, well, all on these engines, I've made the piston and the liner together, and I'm just sort of like going through this learning curve of how to get that right. I mean, I'm very pleased with this Mark III that I've done here, because you see that the weight of the crank pin, the crank web, it's so
Okay.
free.
Really.
It's so free.
I'm going to drop your website off the screen, and I'm
Yeah.
going to go back to our normal screen, and
Okay.
and then we will, and then okay, do that again, Steve, because now the picture's bigger.
Yeah. Well, the idea to get a really fast engine, or a really good engine,
hmm
is obviously to remove as much of the internal friction as possible.
Definitely.
So the way to get a really good bottom end is the distance between the two bearings is critical. So a ball race will have a certain amount of play in it. So when we tighten up this prop driver onto the collet, it's essentially pulling those two bearings together.
Right.
Now, if you don't get the distance just right from the shoulder of the crank to the quarter diameter,
hmm
if the crank is slightly short, what happens then is, when you tighten up that collet, it pulls the inner races of the two bearings together.
Right. You're crushing them.
So you're crushing them, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the idea is, but the thing is, you don't want it the other way too much, because if you get into a smash, you're going to push the whole lot back into the back plate.
Right.
So the idea is that which we do on every engine, is to just measure with the crank in the back bearing only, just measure the distance that the crankshaft protrudes into the small bearing diameter.
hmm
We try and make it about 1 to 2 thousandths of an inch that the shaft sticks through, so that you know that when you tighten up that front bearing, it's not it's not crushing them. You're keeping the clearance in the bearings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously incredibly important that when we bore that front bearing, that it's absolutely perfectly in line with the plain bearing part, with
Right.
the two bearings.
Sure.
So that the idea is that you maybe have 1 or 2 thou clearance between the shaft and the plain bearing part, and it never touches it, and it's suspended purely in them two free running bearings. And when you sort of get the knack of getting it right, you know you've got it right, because when you do that with it, the weight, you see the weight of the crank web,
Yes. It goes to the bottom.
you're nice and free, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
then we aim to get maybe 2 thou taper in the bore from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm.
The Oliver rule is, this is what John Oliver himself told me, it's the 5-second rule. Hold it up for 5 seconds, and if you don't lose compression after 5 seconds, it's good.
You've got a good engine.
Got a good engine, yeah.
Oh.
And we like it to be tapered at the bottom, obviously, because it's just pumping there, so it's just a removal of friction. So you get that nice Oliver snap when you put it over.
Mm-hmm.
But incidentally, I found the most difficult part was getting the contrapiston fit just right. I think that's
There. We talked about that. You know,
yeah.
I do a little bit of rough machining around my place here too, and a chum needed to have a contrapiston made for one of his diesel motors. So I said, you know, sure, I can do that for you. Well, um, when I was done, I had a pile of contrapistons there.
Yeah, me too at the start.
Yeah, I had like, I think I did five contrapistons until I got one that was just right. And
Yeah,
the only way I could do it was actually one of the fellows on RC Groups, John Shannon, he made a comment about you know, being able to because at this point he said you're removing microns.
yeah,
You know, we're not taking millimeters off. One little tweak on my lathe and the contrapiston was scrap. You know, so
yeah,
you know I would use a steel rule with some really fine
yeah,
cloth on it, right? We would take a couple of microns off and we got it to
yeah,
work. Right?
yeah,
So
yeah. So what I found the optimum setting is that you want a 3 micron interference fit. That's what you
3
need.
micron, that, eh?
Yeah.
Wow.
4 microns you get away with, but it doesn't always knock back when you slacken the compression off, you know.
A millionth of a meter. My goodness, a micron.
That's right, yeah. But you'll notice on an Oliver contrapiston that there's a little recess in the back of them.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
2 millimeters deep.
right.
And it's an expanding mandrel that goes in there. So you hold the contrapistons on an expanding mandrel, and they go in a little collet on a cylindrical grinder, and that allows you to grind them. And it just holds them tight enough so you can just get the feel as well. You know.
Right, right. Oh.
So because, as you say, if you're just making one on your lathe, you can easily waste an afternoon. That's right.
Oh, yeah, yeah, easy. Yeah, there was quite a pile of metal left over.
Yeah,
Yeah. What, Steve? What would you say are some of your biggest challenges, or were your biggest challenges in getting this going?
The biggest challenges in getting it going is essentially that is, you see, all of the bits that we made for Tom's engines, I kind of got those made or in the factory or figured out, you know, I made them, but Tom was the one who assembled them. And so that final bit, although, you know, I'm an engineer and I built whatever, that final bit was something that I didn't really get involved in. So to me, that biggest challenge is definitely getting that piston just right. I'm just getting so I can do it consistently. It's an interesting thing because it's a feel thing, but you don't know what the feel is you're looking for in the first place. So you don't know what you don't know.
Right. Yeah. You've never done it before. Yeah.
So, you know, so I would do one. I think, oh, okay, and I put it in an engine, and it's clicking, you know, and it's obviously clearly tight. In the engine, it's too tight or it's too loose. And then so eventually you get one that's just right. And as long as you can remember what just right feels like, once you felt it
Yeah.
once,
Yeah.
you know what to feel again, if you know what I mean. So it's that
Yeah.
trial and
Yeah.
error
Yeah.
thing
It's a
of
touchy
just,
feely. Yeah.
it is, yeah.
Mhm.
So I believe this cub here, which
Yeah.
I made the other day, I think I got this one right first time. I haven't run this one yet, but I think I got this one right. Just know, got it right
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. What for your 2.5 cc engines, a Mark III? What is your propeller of choice?
Um, and eight. So we test them on an 8x6 for 2.5 cc.
Mhm.
I think that's what they fly them with in competition. But a chap from the Barton site who knows far more about this than me, that says if you want to kind of simulate the revs that you'll get when you're flying, put an 8x4 on.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so
what? So when you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
yeah, so I made a Mark III recently and messed around with it a lot, and on an 8x4 I got it doing 16,000 RPM.
Can I have that engine, Steve?
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, in the words of the gentleman Olivers, we'll be happy to put you on your list, sir.
Right. It's 16,000.
Yeah. But you know, there's an Australian um, one, Steve Rothwell, and we can't match his. I think
Really?
he gets 17.3, 17.4 out of his Olivers.
Wow.
But it does take him a day to put one together, apparently. So I've read an article on how he does it. You know, he absolutely goes to town on them, but they are absolutely superb things. I don't
Yeah.
think
Well, there's a gentleman in the UK, if I'm not mistaken, Copeman. I
that's
don't
correct.
know if he's still active in the engine building. I know he commented on my YouTube channel on a couple of engine runs I did, and he he's very successful on his tuning, and he really produces some great results as well.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I believe I've seen some posts from George Copeman on the
Hmm.
Barton site, and you know over the years, because you know there's lots of sort of like um, closet experts in all these sort of things, aren't there? So
Right.
there's always been a little bit of controversy about George Copeman, but I think that when you read about what he did to those Oliver engines, it actually makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Of course it
Uh,
does. Yeah.
um, you know, people used to say that he kind of they'd have bearings spinning in the crankcase and whatever, which he might have had on occasion, but essentially what he did was he blueprinted an engine. He made sure that the crank that the on the conrod that the crank pin and the gudgeon pin holes were perfectly square.
Right.
You know, he would do that, and
Hmm.
also that the top surface made everything was square and how it should be. Because the Olivers were making them in production, they didn't have much time to, you know, individually mess around with engines like that. And George Copeman just sort of removed all the internal friction,
Right.
even to the
Right.
point of easing the bearing diameter so they weren't clamping so tight on the ball
Exactly.
races.
And that's exactly what you were talking about. So,
Yeah,
mhm.
and getting that, you know, I know you can't feel it here, but if you get one, you can actually just feel the clearance in the bearings on that.
There's a
And
whisker there. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the sort of things that I believe that George Copeman did, which basically just made a great design
Hmm.
into what it would be if everything was perfect. I mean, I think that's what he did.
Right.
And,
Right.
and of course, a racing engine is all about, you know, a great racing engine to me is one that's worn out nearly to being worn out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just all about reducing that friction
Yeah.
and any impediment to it that
Right. Right.
rotating parts may come across.
Right.
And anything you can do, obviously, to get more gas.
Of course,
through.
of course. Fuel. What's the weapon of choice when it comes to fuel?
So it's not very sophisticated for me, Frank. It's Model Technics, Model Diesel Fuel D1000 or something. Tom
Okay.
used to mix his fuel.
Yeah.
But he did used to mix his fuel and whatever. And I just haven't got time, you know. I just buy it in a can and put it in the engine and it goes. But
You know what? D1000.
Yeah, Model Technics. It's just a commercially available fuel.
All right. You know the ratio?
I'll have to get back to you on that, Frank.
That's all right. You know,
bear with me. Just bear with me a second. I might have it written down here.
Hang on. Oh, all right. And this question for those of us that make our own fuel mixes, right? I've got no place to buy commercial fuel here in Ontario, so see what he says. All right.
Yeah.
Do
you want me to put the light on? Am I going a bit dark?
You're getting a bit dark. Yes, you are.
Okay, I'll put the light on.
Put a light on and see what happens. Hey, that's better.
That's better, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, fuel mix.
Yes.
20% castor.
20.
30% ether. And 50 paraffin.
50 paraffin. Yep.
Yeah, with, if you can, 1.75% of IPN.
Right.
It's like amyl nitrate or nitrite, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, when I first started doing some diesel engine runs, we were just we have to mix our own fuel. We can't buy any commercial stuff here, so it was a mix of equal parts, and we learned pretty quickly that we were way off the mark on these Oliver engines, running them on equal parts of fuel. You know, these things were spewing oil out the back end like crazy. So yeah. We've run a lot of our stuff now on that mix that you just mentioned there. Yeah. Runs well.
Yeah. So this is a leaflet that used to go with the engines when Tom in Tom's era.
Yeah.
So you know, so we're looking on a 2.5cc engine, on a new engine. What we're saying is run for 2 to 3 minutes on a 7x6 or an 8x4. Really, the idea is to get them hot quick. Really.
Yeah.
And I recently read, which makes a lot of sense to me, that Steve Rothwell, on his very first run of an engine, he would warm them up with a hot air gun first on his very first run.
You know, as soon as you say that, the first thing I think of is dub jet. So in the United States, John Shannon and Dub produced or they still do produce. And I remember I was at Toledo in the United States. They have used to have a huge model show there. And I remember talking to Dub about his motors. And I bought a couple of engines off him. And his engines, oh my, they are squeaking tight, right? And his advice was warm the engine up, a new one at least. Warm the engine up, with a hairdryer or something, get it hot. And as soon as the engine fires, full throttle. And he says, get it screaming hot immediately, and then you can, and then begin the break-in process. So that was his advice anyway.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because we do try to get these to squeak a little bit at the top.
Right.
Just the last 3 millimeters, but not squeak, just feel a bit of resistance on the top there.
Yeah.
And then that cast iron piston will bed itself in quite quickly. But yeah, get it hot really.
Yep.
I remember, especially I remember first coming across that when with ABC glow engines, I used to say get those hot as fast as you can because they really do squeak at the top, don't they?
Yeah, for sure, right? For sure. All right. Well, that's quite the story you've got there, Steve. So how so if I order an engine today, what could we expect for delivery times and stuff like this?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot just lately because I've been waiting for such a long time for my Mark III cranks for the first
Hmm.
op,
Yeah.
and what I thought would take a couple of weeks lead time, that particular factory, they nearly shut down for COVID. So,
Yeah.
it's, I don't know. I'm thinking, current thinking, maybe the first lot of Mark IIIs will probably be maybe a couple of months away, something
Right.
like that.
Right. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
COVID has hurt everything, hasn't it?
It sure has. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not. You can't just you know go anywhere and get something these days because
No.
everything's
No.
all
No. It's
furloughed.
no. It's impossible. Yeah,
Yeah.
impossible.
So
Wow.
in the background, that's what I'm doing while I'm waiting for these sort
Right.
of things. Is
Hmm.
to You can imagine, Frank, that I am like a kid in a sweet shop. I'm surrounded by engines. I think I'll build one of these today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
And so I'm learning, all of the little tiny idiosyncrasies of it,
Sure.
and it- just having fun, I suppose, really, and just trying to keep that old name alive that's been going
Right.
all these
Yeah.
years,
Well,
and
yeah. Well, you're doing a fine job. We really appreciate the fact um, that you've taken on this challenge here. Um, I'm sure Tom is impressed. He would be very happy. And of
yeah,
course, Jay Oliver happy as well to see that things are going on as usual, and um, the engines are going to be cranked out better. Even you're obviously with your background, your engineering skill set, why you're producing a product. We'll be selling a product that very uniform and obviously a good performer. So
yeah.
that's
That's the aim, is at least to
yeah.
try and match what others before me have done.
Right, right, right. Hey, what have you got for like a goal? What's the ultimate that you want to see happen with this?
Well, my goal is obviously every year that when we're allowed to, we have a thing that we call the Nats in the UK, which is the National
Right,
Championships of all flying,
right.
um, and from everything, from every aspect of control, I'm flying to all of the disciplines of radio control, and it takes place usually in the August bank holiday. Um, at RAF Barkston Heath, which is an RAF
Hmm.
base that they've traditionally vacated for that weekend for the model club. So
Right.
we take over the whole airbase, and just to see an engine that I've made compete would be nice.
That would be awesome. That would
Yeah,
be awesome. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's good. See it compete and see a winner.
Absolutely see a winner. Yeah, but just to see it compete, the big rivals. I think a PAW. They make a good engine, don't they?
Yeah,
So.
they sure do. Yeah, as well. Yeah, that's
Um,
good.
but that'd be nice, to think that something, which was the same sentiment that Tom had, really, was that Tom would have done this for nothing. He would have slept next to his engines. It's just a passion, and to
Yeah,
think,
exactly.
think that somebody's competing with something that you've made with your hands.
Hmm.
That's it for
Hmm.
me, really.
I think that's
Yeah,
about as good as it gets, right? That's
yeah.
that's
I suppose
top
another goal is
top
to get one
recognition.
over. Another goal is to get one over to you sometime, maybe. That'd be good, wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah. Excellent. Well, great. Well, you know, we're so happy to be able to interview you today and to hear you talk about the Oliver. And you've given us a lot of information here today about the history and where it comes from. But just a great interview, and we're so happy that you're here. And I don't have any more questions. Is there any more hidden secrets that you've got sitting in the back? You have any really wild aspirations for like a 2-cylinder or something coming out?
Well, my secret thing, I'll tell you what my secret thing is, that I really loved the Mark V.
Yeah.
Now, the Mark V, they only just started making, and I think the Mark V's got a lot of, I just like the Mark V. I don't think you can use a Mark V in vintage things because it came too late, but I just like the Mark V, and I think that there was so much more development in it that just for my own purposes, I want to just make one and just see what we can make one of those do, really.
Yeah.
I mean, Tom was working on an engine. There's a very famous, certainly in our circles, engine designer and builder by the name of Brian Turner in the UK, and Tom had been working in the latter part before he died with Brian Turner, and they designed a thing that's called a 420. And to look at it, it looks like a JO19, but I think the 420 was a different bore and stroke configuration. But Brian Turner drew all of this up for Tom, and by all accounts, it is something special, as far as performance is concerned. I've got some Mark 420 bits and that, but just for my own nostalgia thing, it was just that when I was young, a Mark V Oliver was like, when I grow up, I'm going to have one of them.
Yeah.
So just for my own things, I want to just develop a Mark V Oliver, what I think that it could be one day, even if I only make one, really.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Well, we wish you a ton of success. I think it's nice that the engine collecting world and the people that actually use the engines sees this little interview today. And to be honest with you, I hope you get swamped with orders.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice problem to have, I suppose, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is really.
Yeah.
It certainly is. I know some of my collector friends here, I think, have already reached out to you looking for bits and pieces, for the needle valve assemblies and things like that. So it's pretty exciting that we have the actual manufacturer sitting in the chair beside us here today, and he's making a world famous engine, and the quality will just continue. So Steve, thanks so much for joining us today, and we look forward to great things from you. Thanks.
Really, thank you for asking me, Frank, and I hope we can stay in touch as well. Yeah,
exactly.